David's got himself in a bit of a pickle. The Lord had told him to stay in the southern parts of Judah. But Saul kept harassing him, even though David sought to make peace on several occasions. And so eventually David said, "I've had enough of this. I'll go down to Philistine territory where Saul can't get me." And so he'd gone down to Achish, king of Gath. Remember, Gath was where Goliath had come from. His whole military career began when he defeated Goliath. But now that Saul was harassing him, the king of Achish was happy to welcome him, with the 600 men that came with him, and gave David the city of Ziklag to live in, with the families he was caring for. And they went on raids against the enemies of Israel, but they told the king of Gath that they were raiding against part of Judah. And so Achish became more and more enamoured with David. Now the Philistines decided it was time to have a big push against King Saul. And Achish had said to David, "Well, you'll go with me." And David had assured him, "You know what I can do." And so to my thinking, David, by putting himself into Gentile territory, has now found himself fighting against the people of God. But he doesn't back out. Then the Philistines gathered together all their army at Aphek, and the Israelites encamped by a fountain which is in Jezreel. And the lords of the Philistines passed in review, by hundreds and by thousands. David and his men passed in review at the rear with Achish. Then the princes of the Philistines said, "What are these Hebrews doing here?" And Achish said to the princes of the Philistines, "Is this not David, the servant of Saul, king of Israel, who has been with me these days, or these years? And to this day I have found no fault in him, since he defected to me." But the princes of the Philistines were angry with him. So the princes of the Philistines said to him, "Make this fellow return, that he may go back to the place which you have appointed for him. And do not let him go down with us to battle, lest in the battle he become our adversary. For with what could he reconcile himself to his master, if not with the heads of these men? Is this not David, of whom they sang to one another in dances, saying, 'Saul has slain his thousands, and David his 10,000s. Then Achish called David and said to him, "Surely, as the Lord lives, you have been upright, and your going out and your coming in with me in the army is good in my sight. For to this day I have not found evil in you, since the day of your coming to me. Nevertheless, the lords do not favour you. Therefore return now, and go in peace, that you may not displease the lords of the Philistines." So David said to Achish, "But what have I done? And to this day what have you found in your servant, as long as I have been with you, that I may not go and fight against the enemies of my lord the king?" Then Achish answered and said to David, "I know that you are as good in my sight as an angel of God. Nevertheless, the princes of the Philistines have said, 'You shall not go with us to the battle.' Now therefore rise early in the morning with your master's servants, who have come with you. And as soon as you are up early in the morning and have light, depart." So David and his men rose early to depart in the morning, to return to the land of the Philistines, and the Philistines went up to Jezreel. My name's Arthur. Thank you for joining me as we share together 1 Samuel chapter 29. How did David get in this predicament? Fighting on the wrong side. Well, the Lord didn't let him fight on the wrong side. His reputation as a soldier for Israel meant that the rest of the Philistines did not trust David. And indeed, David could easily have fought against the Philistines and turned against them in the middle of the battle. It had happened before, in one of the earlier battles. Many Israelites who were with the Philistines turned against the Philistines when they saw that the Lord was fighting for Israel. Was this what David was planning to do? Notice the vagueness of his responses that he gives. They're open to interpretation. The 2 times that he has spoken, where he says, that I may not go out and fight against the enemies of my Lord the King. Now he has used that title to refer to Saul, and the Philistines are attacking Saul. When he says it before Achish, Achish assumes it's referring to him as his Lord the King. But is David thinking of Achish, or is David thinking of Saul? And previously, when Achish had said, "Come with me," he had made an equally interpretable statement, not telling a lie, but making a statement that Achish would interpret one way, but David could understand another way. But we're not told what David was thinking, we're only told what he said. In any case, David does not show any hint of wavering. He has taken a position in Gentile territory, and he's following through consistently with appearing to have adopted Achish as his king. But the Lord did not let him go with the Philistines. They had learnt not to trust Israelites in their army. But of course, Christians often find themselves on the wrong side. We see that David didn't ask the Lord about any of this, as far as the record goes. No doubt he was following the form of his religion, but in terms of seeking guidance from the Lord, there is no suggestion that he did that. But the Lord has not deserted him. The Lord still has plans and purposes for David. But David needs to come back into a closer fellowship and walk with God. And we'll see how that happens in the next chapter. Meanwhile, we see that Achish himself is referring to the Lord, all in capitals, meaning Jehovah. He says, "Surely as the Lord Jehovah lives, you have been upright, and your going out and your coming in with me in the army is good in my sight." And so it is that those who are the enemies of God's people often see themselves as doing God's will. And in fact, in this situation, they are, for it is the Lord's determination to use the Philistines to bring about the death of Saul, the end of his regime. We saw that in the previous chapter. Even though Samuel had died, Saul had orchestrated a séance to bring up Samuel from the grave, because the Lord wouldn't talk to him through the normal means. And Samuel says, "You're going to die, you and your sons, because you have not walked faithfully in the Lord's ways." But Achish, who doesn't really know the Lord, but knows of the Lord, is using the name of the Lord. And people often do this. They're conscious of God, but they don't have that personal relationship with him, and so they fight against God's people. They use the name of the Lord in vain. They have a form of godliness, but deny the power thereof. It's remarkable that God superintends all the affairs of men, and while some men seek to walk with God and become instruments of righteousness, others follow their own wisdom and knowledge, may be influenced by the teaching of God, but are actually fighting against the people of God. But it doesn't help when the people of God are not walking in God's ways either. So the whole confusion that is represented in this chapter is typical of what we experience in life. And the only way that we can get a meaningful answer in our circumstances is to pray without ceasing, to worship the Lord, to get the mind of the Lord, and to understand what the Lord would have us do, that we walk in his ways, not just with a form of religion, not just acknowledging God with our lips, but submitting to him with our hearts.